The last time I checked, Trump had litigation pending against him in New York, Florida, Georgia, and DC. The Georgia case seems to be getting a lot of attention lately. Now, as you know, we don't get political on this show, so I'm not going the direction you might think I'm going with this. I just bring it up because it leads nicely into our topic for the day. But let me take a slightly different approach here. At the moment, I'm feeling very sentimental. I'm looking at old pictures, getting a little misty. It's brutal. And the reason is that my son just went to college. My wife and I just got back from getting him set up at Berklee Music College, or whatever it's called. So it's exciting, but it's also very bittersweet. By now, you have to be saying to yourself, what do I care about Trump and your kid? Okay, fair, I brought that on myself, but there's a reason for this, and here it comes. Last week, we talked about offshore asset protection. Now, that is bulletproof. It's the best you're gonna get. That hasn't changed since last week. If you wanna see details, then go check out the episode. It's called Putin and Offshore Asset Protection. But offshore is also a bit of a pain. And as for offshore banking, well, I don't wanna say it's completely dead, but it's definitely not what it was. The reason for the big change in foreign banking has to do with some fairly recent laws. They're not new anymore. We're talking 2013, 2014. The main one is called FATCA. Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. All of the foreign jurisdictions that I'm aware of have signed off on this, even the mighty Switzerland. FATCA requires foreign banks to report to the IRS on accounts of their US citizen clients under certain circumstances and criteria that I won't go into here. But that's the gist of it. But I have a funny story for you. At least, it seemed funny to me, though I know it wasn't funny at all to my clients. For example, I have a couple of clients who do business in Panama, and they had an account in Panama. Shortly after FATCA passed, they got a call from their bank saying, we need you to come down and verify some of your information. So they did, popped in on the branch, and the account manager handed them a check with the full balance of their account, basically saying, go away, we don't want your business. These are not the only clients that reported stories like this to me. I have clients in other jurisdictions that had similar experiences of getting fired by their bank. And the thing is this, not only is it an issue, FATCA that is, an issue for the US citizen because whatever's in that account is going to be reported to the IRS, but it's also paying for the banks. A lot of the banks just don't want that headache. Now, over the years, things have settled down somewhat, and there is still some offshore banking, but things have definitely changed. And by and large, my clients have found it more advantageous since FATCA passed to do their banking onshore and use domestic asset protection techniques. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, let me go back to my intro for just a second, because when we think of asset protection, we generally think of threats. Creditors, litigation, vultures. So it made sense to bring up Trump because however you may feel about it, he certainly is under fire at the moment. But then I also brought up my kid because there were other reasons to think of asset protection. For example, you work your whole life to put together a little something. I suspect you'd like to pass that along to your heirs without the wrong people taking chunks out of it, right? Okay, so if we're not going offshore, then what can we do to protect those assets? Well, actually quite a lot. I will have to at least mention setting up an entity. Now you're all very savvy. That's just business 101. You're not going to do business in your personal name. You're going to set up a company. You know that. But some people ask me if they should set up a corporation rather than an LLC to get better asset protection. It kind of seems intuitive. A corporation is a little more formal. It's a little more of a hassle to maintain and to set up. So it should be better, right? Well, actually, that's not right. That's not right at all. Let's say you set up a corporation. Now it's your company, so you're going to be the sole shareholder. Okay, now get this concept. This is important. Threats can come from two different directions. There can be attacks against your company, in which case you want to make sure that your personal assets are protected. That's usually the scenario we prepare for, but the opposite can also be true. There can also be attacks against you personally, right? And in that case, you want your corporate assets to be protected. All right, now in the first case, attacks against your company, either a corporation or an LLC will give you very good protection. Your attackers are going to try to pierce the corporate veil, but that is not easy to do. I've done a fair amount of writing on Piercing the Corporate Veil, so check out my links below here for more information on that. Now, what if the attack comes from the opposite direction? That, let's say your attacker has something against you personally and they want to get to your corporate assets. Well, if you have a corporation, they could potentially take your shares. Shares or stock in a corporation are personal assets. So if you personally are the target, then your corporate shares are exposed. LLCs, on the other hand, don't have shares. That's why we talk in terms of your ownership percentage. You know, like you're 100% owner or you're 50% owner or whatever. But we don't talk about shares when you have an LLC. Some attorneys may use the term membership units, and that can be convenient for some reasons, but don't let that confuse you. LLCs don't have shares. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because your attackers don't have anything to attach or liquidate or foreclose. See what I mean? No shares, nothing. The best that a creditor can do is obtain a charging lien against you. And that just means that the creditor can attach any distributions of money that the LLC makes to you. Well, if you just don't make any distributions to yourself, then there's nothing the creditor can do. That brings us to the concept of a multi-member LLC. So let's say that instead of you being the only owner of your company, you have a spouse or a child or a good friend, whomever, also as a member or owner of the company. Well, the charging lien is only effective as to you personally. So the LLC can safely distribute money to these other members without triggering that charging lien. See what I mean? So now you're thinking, well, I'm not too sure that I want to name anybody else as an owner of my company. That sounds a little dodgy. And besides, it might not be too sweet a gig for that person either. They're going to be thinking, well, what kind of liability am I signing myself up for? Are there going to be tax implications and the like? All right, good point. But remember, a member of an LLC does not necessarily have to be a human being. A member of an LLC could be another LLC, or it could be a trust. I just blew your mind, didn't I? Now your head is swimming, you're thinking about all the possible combinations. Good. You're starting to understand the game, but there's a lot more to it. Now let's talk about trusts. I do find myself doing a fair amount of writing on trusts, so I'm going to drop some links below in case you want to get some more information on that. And I should specify that I'm talking about trusts in the United States. Un fideicomiso or un fiduci is not going to work the same way and may not in fact work at all, especially in countries that are based on civil law. However, a US trust is a beautiful thing. Now, what do I like about trusts for purposes of asset protection? Well, one of the main things is confidentiality. Now, double check the rules in your particular state, but there's generally no requirement to register your trust with the State Department, in the same way that we do with companies. And if there is a requirement, it can generally be easily avoided with a little bit of planning. The same is true for county recordings. You know how you have to record a deed or any instrument that has to do with real estate? Well, that's not the case with your trust agreement. There is no obligation to record that trust agreement with the county, and you probably shouldn't. So with a trust, you basically have an entity that is completely outside the public record. Now, you might need to get a tax ID number and do your IRS reportings. Remember from our last episode, I'm not trying to help you guys evade taxes. But as for other outside threats, the privacy you get with a trust is extremely valuable. Remember what Mr. Miyagi said, best block, no be there. Now in Florida, the Sunshine State, the corporate divisions page is very transparent. You can see addresses, you can see names, you can see owners, officers. It even asks for the company's tax ID number. Well, damn, why, right? Why make it easy for the trolls, for jealous family and friends, scorned lovers, competitors? There's too much information. Now, most states don't have that level of transparency. In fact, few do. But I think you get my point. You can sidestep that whole issue through a trust. The last thing I'll touch on is flexibility. Let's say you want to make a change to your trust agreement. Well, you just call me up, I make the change, you sign it, and we're done. There are no filings, there are no recordings. I just draft the amendment, you sign it, and we move on. Well, think about that in the context of asset protection. That agility can be very useful. There's no way to know what the future may bring, so the ability to make changes quickly and confidentially, well, that's pretty wonderful. All right, let me see if I can blow your mind one more time. Let's say you set up a trust and you make the trust the owner of your LLC, or at least one of the owners. Let that sink in. Now, from an asset protection point of view, that's pretty good. So that is why you care about Trump's litigation and my kids' college. So if you're gonna stay on shore, you're not gonna get all the available asset protection features, but you can do pretty darn well. And let's face it, staying on shore is just so much more convenient when it comes to banking and regular business operations. That is it for this time. We will talk more soon.